Welcome to Flashpoints. I'm Margaret Brennan here with Juan Zarate, National Security Advisor here at CBS. There's been a lot of furor within the past 24 hours in regard to this disclosure that the government has been monitoring, perhaps data mining, information that many Americans thought was totally in the private space. Explain this FISA court and what the NSA is actually doing here.
Right. Margaret, two remarkable revelations. First, the revelation that the U.S. government is acquiring mass amounts of data from Verizon to look at call information history. The second, and more explosive, the fact that 9 internet companies are working with the NSA, cooperating through the FISA court to get data that the government needs to use to correlate potential threats and information. What the FISA court is, and what the government is saying, is that these are legal, these are important and critical programs. But what's important is that the FISA court itself has signed off on them. The FISA court, remember, is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court that's built around the act itself. It's a secret court that approves these secret programs and engages in ongoing monitoring. So these types of programs, for example, every 90 days get renewed. The court will review them, will make sure that the measures and constraints in them are being honored, will take representations from the government. And so the FISA court in some ways is the judicial branch's oversight over these types of programs.
But their decisions are not public. They have oversight, but there's no visibility or transparency into why they're deciding.
That's right, and that's why you've heard criticism from the left and from groups like ACLU saying, that's fine and dandy, but all of this is happening in secret. And if it weren't for these leaks from the Washington Post and the Guardian, we wouldn't even know that these programs exist. And so the question is this balance between the need to look at data, to look at mass amounts of data and correlations, and privacy and civil liberties. And finding that right balance, not only in terms of acquiring and correlating it and analyzing it, but also protecting it. And so the government will say, and I've been in these positions before, there are protections for American citizens. These are not targeted at American citizens or information, and they're not looking necessarily in the first instance at content. And so we've heard the president just today talk about the fact that with the Verizon program, for example, they're not listening to people's conversations. It's metadata. Phone numbers, time of call, duration, et cetera.
How necessary is this gathering of information to protecting the security of the country? Because this goes back a build off of the Patriot Act and has been in place, the president says, since 2006. This isn't new.
Right. I think it becomes more and more important as individuals, terrorist groups that are potentially threats move into the online space and begin to communicate the way that everyone does. And the difference here, Margaret, and I think this is what gives people a little bit of discomfort, is we've moved from the model of targeted searches or surveillance. We know one person is a suspect. We're going to go after his communications, look at him. What these programs are is looking at mass sets of raw data and using algorithms, computers, and analysts to try to figure out where in those mass amounts of terabytes there are inklings and connections that are important to discover threats. And I think that's a major shift, and it's a shift that reflects, frankly, the big data environment that we're in as a society. Mass amounts of data, and the government's trying to not only exploit that, but trying to do it in a way that's helpful to prevent threats.
The Director of National Intelligence says this is focusing on foreign nationals, non-American citizens, without, court approval. Does this information go beyond the U.S.? Does it get shared internationally?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the U.S. government has certain privileged relationships. Countries like the United Kingdom that we trust quite a bit, sharing classified information. And this kind of information, the analysis that comes from these data sets, gets blended with other information and no doubt gets passed to other governments. And so one thing you'll see here, Margaret, and be interesting from your perch covering the State Department and foreign policy, is that this will start a huge debate in Europe. We've seen this in the past. The 2006 revelation of the terrorist financing tracking program started a major debate in Europe about protection of data privacy, in that case, financial data. In this case, there's going to be major questions about how the internet companies that Europeans subscribe to as well are cooperating with the U.S. government and what information the U.S. government is looking at from a European perspective. And so that's going to become a major next phase of this over the next few months, and I would dare say you're going to see folks like the European Parliament start to get into the debate and demand lots of assurances from the U.S. government.
assurances that the president says he's already delivering to Congress, though we've heard here in the U.S.
That's what he
some
says.
Congress people saying, we want to know a little bit more here. Well, we'll see. Juan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Margaret. Appreciate it.
This has been Flashpoints.